The moment Lucia Martinez stepped off the stagecoach in Silver Ridge, Nevada, in 1882, three women turned their backs to her with such deliberate cruelty that she felt the sting like a physical slap across her face. Her grandmother's silver cross hung heavy against her chest, a reminder of the heritage she had been taught to hide, and she clutched her worn carpetbag tighter as she made her way down the dusty main street. The town sprawled before her like a judgment, all wooden storefronts and suspicious eyes, and she wondered if accepting the teaching position here had been the worst mistake of her life. She had left San Francisco hoping for a fresh start, but the way people stared at her dark hair and bronze skin told her that some things never changed no matter how many miles you traveled. The schoolhouse sat at the edge of town, a modest structure badly in need of paint, and Lucia pushed open the door to find dust motes dancing in the afternoon light. She set down her bag and surveyed the empty room with its crooked desks and cracked chalkboard, feeling a familiar weight settle in her chest. Her mother had always told her to be grateful for what she had, to never speak Spanish in public, to straighten her hair if she could, to become invisible in all the ways that mattered. Lucia had followed those rules for 22 years, and she was tired, bone-tired of pretending to be something she was not. "You must be the new school teacher." The voice came from the doorway, deep and unhurried, and Lucia turned to find a tall man leaning against the frame with his hat in his hands. He had sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer sky, and there was something about the way he looked at her, direct and without judgment, that made her breath catch. "Name's Caleb Stone. I run cattle just north of here. My sister mentioned the school board finally found someone willing to take the job." Lucia smoothed her skirts, acutely aware of the dust on her traveling clothes. "Lucia Martinez. I arrived on the afternoon stage." She waited for the familiar flicker of disapproval, the subtle shift in expression that usually followed when people heard her surname, but his face remained open and warm. Caleb stepped into the schoolhouse, his boots echoing on the worn floorboards. "Martinez, that's a good name. Spanish?" He moved to one of the desks and tested its stability, frowning when it wobbled. "I'll have some of the boys come fix these before school starts. Can't have the children sitting in broken furniture." "My father's family came from Mexico 3 generations ago," Lucia said carefully, the words tasting like confession. "But I was born in California." "Well, you're as American as anyone else then." Caleb's smile was easy, genuine. "More American than me, probably. My folks came over from Ireland when I was 5. Still remember the boat ride, though I try to forget how sick I was." He moved to the next desk, making a mental note. "You got a place to stay yet?" Lucia shook her head. "The school board mentioned a boarding house." "Mrs. Clancy's place. She's a good woman, fair and honest. I'll walk you over there if you like. Town can be a bit unfriendly to newcomers, but don't let that discourage you. They'll warm up once they see what kind of teacher you are." Caleb's words were kind, but Lucia knew better than to believe them. She had seen the way the women on the street had looked at her, had heard the whispers that followed her like shadows. They walked through town together, Caleb carrying her carpetbag despite her protests, and Lucia felt the weight of curious stares following their every step. Mrs. Clancy's boarding house was a neat 2-story building with lace curtains in the windows, and the proprietor herself answered the door with a measuring look that took in every detail of Lucia's appearance. She was a stout woman with iron-gray hair and the kind of face that revealed nothing. "This is Miss Martinez, the new school teacher," Caleb said, his voice carrying a note of authority that surprised Lucia. "I trust you have a room available for her." Mrs. Clancy's lips pressed into a thin line. "I don't know if I have space right now. Been quite busy lately." "The school board arranged for lodging," Lucia said quietly, feeling the familiar shame rising in her throat. "They sent a letter weeks ago." "Seems to me you'd remember something like that, Mrs. Clancy." Caleb's tone remained pleasant, but there was steel underneath, especially since the school board pays a premium rate for the teacher's room. Be ashamed to lose that steady income. The older woman's expression shifted, calculation replacing reluctance. I suppose I might have a room after all. Small one on the second floor. Meals included, but I expect cleanliness and quiet hours observed. I'm sure Miss Martinez will be a model tenant. Caleb handed Lucia her bag, and their fingers brushed briefly. The contact sent an unexpected warmth through her, and she quickly pulled away, flustered. The room was indeed small, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window overlooking the street. Lucia unpacked her few belongings, hanging her 2 spare dresses in the cramped wardrobe and placing her grandmother's photograph on the bedside table. The old woman stared out at her with fierce eyes, and Lucia touched the frame gently. Her abuela had never hidden who she was, had spoken Spanish proudly until the day she died, and had worn her heritage like a crown. Lucia wished she had inherited even a fraction of that courage. The next morning she woke before dawn and dressed carefully in her best dark blue dress, pinning her hair into a severe bun that pulled at her scalp. She looked at herself in the small mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back, all sharp edges and careful neutrality. This was the version of herself that was supposed to be acceptable, palatable, safe. The schoolhouse was already unlocked when she arrived, and she found Caleb inside with 2 young men, all 3 of them working on the broken desks. He looked up when she entered, his face breaking into a smile that made something flutter in her chest. Morning, Miss Martinez. We're just about done here. Figured we'd get an early start so everything would be ready for you. You didn't have to do this. Lucia set down the slate and primer she had brought from California, touched by the gesture. Yes, I did. Education matters, and the children in this town deserve a proper school. Caleb tested the last desk and nodded with satisfaction. There. Good as new, or at least better than they were. The young men left with friendly nods, and suddenly Lucia was alone with Caleb in the quiet schoolhouse. He walked over to where she stood arranging books, and she was acutely aware of his presence, the scent of pine soap and leather, the easy strength in his movements. Can I ask you something? His voice was soft, almost hesitant. Lucia looked up, meeting his blue eyes. Of course. Yesterday, when you told me your name, you looked like you were bracing for a blow. And Mrs. Clancy, she treated you poorly until I pushed back. He leaned against the desk, his expression serious. Is it always like that for you? The question was so direct, so unexpected that Lucia felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them back furiously. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. And I think you're tired of pretending you don't. Caleb's voice was gentle but firm. I've seen how people act in this town. The way they decide who belongs and who doesn't based on the stupidest reasons. It's not right, and I won't pretend it is. Lucia turned away, gripping the edge of the desk. My whole life I've been taught to make myself smaller, to hide the parts of me that make people uncomfortable. My mother wouldn't let us speak Spanish at home after my father died because she was afraid it would cost us opportunities. She changed the way she dressed, the food she cooked, even the stories she told. And I learned to do the same because it was easier than fighting. Easier for who? Caleb asked quietly. The question hung in the air between them, and Lucia found she had no answer. It had never been easier for her, not really. It had just been survival, a slow erasure of everything that made her who she was. For everyone else, she finally whispered. That's not living, Lucia. That's just existing. He moved closer, and she could feel the warmth radiating from him. You shouldn't have to apologize for who you are or where you come from. Your heritage is something to be proud of, not ashamed of. Easy for you to say. The words came out sharper than she intended. You don't know what it's like to walk into a room and watch people's faces close off, to hear children repeat slurs their parents taught them, to be told you're less than over and over until you start to believe it. You're right, I don't know exactly what that's like. Caleb's honesty was disarming, but I know what it's like to be an outsider. When my family came here, we were dirt-poor Irish immigrants, and people treated us like we were less than human. My father worked himself to death trying to prove we belonged. And for what? So people could give us the barest scraps of respect? He shook his head. I decided a long time ago that I wasn't going to live my life seeking approval from people whose opinions don't matter, and neither should you. Lucia looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the determination in his eyes, the set of his jaw. There was something magnetic about his certainty, his refusal to bend to the small cruelties of small minds. I don't know how to be any other way, she admitted. Then let me help you remember. Caleb reached out and gently took her hand. Let me show you that you don't have to hide. Not here, not with me. Before she could respond, the door burst open and a stream of children poured in, their voices high and excited. Lucia pulled her hand away quickly, but not before she saw several of the older children exchange knowing glances. She straightened her spine and moved to the front of the classroom, forcing herself into the role of teacher, authority figure, someone in control. The first day of school was predictably chaotic. She had 15 students ranging from 6 to 14 years old, and they tested her patience with the casual cruelty of children everywhere. 2 of the older boys made comments about her accent, though she had worked for years to eliminate any trace of Spanish influence from her English. A girl with blonde ringlets asked loudly if it was true that Mexican people ate dogs, and several children laughed. Lucia felt her face burn with shame and anger, but she kept her voice calm and steady. We will have respect in this classroom, she said firmly, for each other, for learning, and for truth. No, Sarah, Mexican people do not eat dogs. They eat many of the same things you do, including beef, chicken, and vegetables. Spreading false information is the same as lying, and we do not lie in this school. Sarah's face reddened, and she looked down at her desk. The rest of the day passed in a blur of lessons and introductions, and by the time the last student left, Lucia was exhausted. She slumped into her chair and closed her eyes, wondering how she was going to survive a full year of this. Rough first day? Caleb's voice made her jump. He stood in the doorway again, as if he had been waiting. You could say that. Lucia rubbed her temples. Children can be remarkably unkind. They learn it from their parents. Caleb came inside and sat on one of the student desks, his long legs stretched out. But they can also unlearn it. Given the right example, you handled that situation well. I was listening from outside, hope you don't mind. I wanted to make sure you were all right. Something warm bloomed in Lucia's chest at the thought of him standing guard, protecting her in his quiet way. Thank you. Though I'm not sure eavesdropping is entirely proper. Probably not, but I'm a rancher, not a gentleman, so propriety has never been my strong suit. His grin was infectious, and Lucia found herself smiling despite her exhaustion. Have dinner with me tonight. There's a restaurant at the end of town, nothing fancy, but the food is good and honest. Lucia hesitated. I don't know if that's appropriate. I've only just arrived. And people will talk. People are already talking. Might as well give them something interesting to discuss. Caleb stood and offered his hand. Come on, you need to eat, and I promise to be on my best behavior. Mostly. She should say no. Every rule she had learned about being a respectable young woman in a new town told her to decline politely and retreat to her boarding house room. But something in his eyes, the warmth and genuine interest, made her throw caution aside. All right, but only if you promise to tell me more about this ranch of yours. The restaurant was indeed simple, with checkered tablecloths and the smell of fresh bread filling the air. They sat by the window, and Lucia tried not to notice the stares and whispers from other diners. Caleb seemed oblivious to the attention, talking easily about his cattle operation, the challenges of ranching in Nevada's harsh climate, and his hopes for expanding his herd. It's hard work, but it's mine, he said, cutting into his steak. Nobody can take that away from me. That's worth more than all the approval in the world. You make it sound so simple. Lucia picked at her chicken, her appetite dulled by the weight of the day. It's not simple. It's just necessary. Caleb leaned forward, his expression earnest. Lucia, can I tell you something? The first time I saw you yesterday, standing in that schoolhouse, looking like you were ready to face down an army, I thought you were the bravest person I had ever met. You came to a strange town, knowing it wouldn't be easy because you wanted to teach. That takes courage. I don't feel brave. I feel scared and tired and like I'm constantly apologizing for existing. The admission came out in a rush, and Lucia was shocked by her own honesty. Then stop apologizing. Start living. Caleb reached across the table and covered her hand with his. I meant what I said this morning. Let me help you. Let me show you what it's like to be proud of who you are. Over the following weeks, Caleb became a constant presence in Lucia's life. He appeared at the schoolhouse most afternoons helping with repairs or bringing supplies the school board had forgotten to provide. He walked her back to the boarding house, their conversations ranging from the practical to the profound. And slowly, carefully, he began to ask her about her heritage, her family, the parts of herself she had learned to hide. One evening, as they sat on the steps of the schoolhouse watching the sun set over the distant mountains, he asked her to teach him some Spanish words. Lucia's first instinct was to refuse, to maintain the careful boundaries she had built, but something in his eager expression made her relent. Buenas noches, she said softly. It means good evening. Caleb repeated the words carefully, his accent atrocious, but his effort genuine. Buenas noches, that's beautiful. What else? Lucia felt something crack inside her, a wall she had maintained for so long beginning to crumble. Hermoso. It means beautiful, and corazon means heart. Hermoso, Caleb said, looking directly at her. Like you. The compliment, delivered in her grandmother's language, nearly undid her. Tears welled in her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. You don't have to say things like that. I'm not saying it because I have to. I'm saying it because it's true. Caleb shifted closer, and Lucia could feel the heat of him beside her. You're beautiful, Lucia. Your strength, your kindness, your heritage, all of it. I wish you could see yourself the way I see you. And how is that? Her voice was barely a whisper, like someone extraordinary. Someone worth knowing in all your fullness, not just the parts you think are acceptable. His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. I'm falling for you, Lucia Martinez, all of you, and I want you to fall for yourself too. The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Lucia's heart hammered in her chest, a wild thing trying to break free. She had spent so long protecting herself, building walls, that the idea of letting someone in terrified her. But Caleb's steady presence, his unwavering support, made her want to try. I'm scared, she admitted. I know, but I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. Caleb lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. We'll figure it out together. As October arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and golden light, Lucia found herself changing in small but significant ways. She began speaking Spanish to herself when she was alone, savoring the familiar cadence of the language. She wrote letters to her mother in San Francisco, asking questions about her father's family that she had never dared to ask before. And she started wearing her grandmother's silver cross outside her dress instead of hidden beneath it. The children in her classroom noticed the changes too. Some of the older students grew more respectful, responding to her quiet confidence. Others became more hostile, parroting their parents' prejudices with increased fervor. One afternoon, she overheard a group of boys planning to vandalize the schoolhouse, and she felt a cold fury rise in her chest. She told Caleb that evening, and his face grew dark with anger. I'll handle it. No. Lucia put her hand on his arm. I need to handle this myself. I can't have you fighting all of my battles for me. This isn't about me fighting your battles. This is about making sure you're safe. Caleb's voice was tight with worry. And I will be. But I need to do this my way. Lucia squeezed his arm gently. Trust me. The next day, she kept the 3 boys after school. They slouched in their seats, defiant and smirking, clearly expecting a lecture they could ignore. Instead, Lucia sat on the edge of her desk and looked at each of them in turn. "I know you were planning to damage the schoolhouse," she said calmly, "and I know why. You don't think I belong here. You think my heritage makes me less than you." The boys shifted uncomfortably, but their expressions remained hostile. The ringleader, a 14-year-old named Thomas, crossed his arms. "My pa says people like you are ruining this country." "And what does that mean, people like me?" Lucia kept her voice level. "Mexican people? Spanish people? People whose skin is darker than yours?" Thomas flushed, but held her gaze. "All of it." "I see. And tell me, Thomas, what do you know about Mexican history? About the contributions Mexican and Spanish people have made to this country?" She stood and walked to the chalkboard, picking up a piece of chalk. "Did you know that Mexican vaqueros were the original cowboys? That they developed the techniques and equipment that ranchers like Mr. Stone still use today? The lasso, the saddle, even the word rodeo, all of it comes from Mexican culture." She began writing on the board, listing facts and dates, her voice growing stronger with each word. Spanish explorers mapped much of this continent before the English ever arrived. Mexican families have been living in California, Nevada, Arizona, and Texas for generations, long before these territories became part of the United States. My great-great-grandfather owned a rancho in California that was larger than this entire town. The boys were listening now, their defiance wavering. Lucia pressed on. "You can hate me if you want. You can believe what your fathers tell you, but you cannot erase history, and you cannot diminish the truth. My people were here first, and we built things that endure. That's not something to be ashamed of. That's something to be proud of." She set down the chalk and faced them. "Now you have a choice. You can continue down this path of ignorance and hatred, or you can choose to be better than your parents' prejudices. You can learn and grow and become men of honor. What will it be?" The silence stretched long and uncomfortable. Finally, the youngest boy, who couldn't have been more than 12, spoke up. "I didn't know all that stuff, about the vaqueros and everything." "That's because nobody teaches it," Lucia said gently. "But I'm teaching it now. And I'll continue teaching it, whether you want to learn or not." Thomas stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. For a moment, Lucia thought he might lash out, but instead he nodded once curtly. "We won't mess with the school, but don't expect us to like you." "I don't need you to like me. I need you to respect the truth and respect this place of learning." Lucia met his eyes steadily. "That's all I ask." The boys left, and Lucia sank into her chair, shaking with the aftermath of adrenaline. She had done it. She had stood her ground without apologizing, without making herself smaller. It was a small victory, but it felt enormous. Caleb was waiting outside when she finally emerged, and one look at her face told him everything. "You did it." "I did it." Lucia laughed, the sound bright and free. "I told them the truth, and I didn't back down, and it felt amazing." He swept her into his arms, spinning her around in the dusty street, and Lucia laughed harder, not caring who saw them. When he set her down, his hands lingered on her waist, and his eyes were warm with pride. "I'm so proud of you," he said softly. "I couldn't have done it without you. You showed me that it was possible to be proud of who I am." Lucia reached up and touched his face, marveling at the way he leaned into her touch. "Thank you, Caleb. You did the hard part yourself. I just reminded you of what was already there." He pressed a kiss to her forehead, then her cheek, and finally, hesitantly, he brushed his lips against hers. The kiss was gentle and sweet, a question and an answer, all at once. Lucia melted into him, her hands gripping his shirt as she kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he whispered. "I love every fierce, brilliant, beautiful part of you." "I love you too." The words came easily, naturally, and Lucia realized she meant them with her whole heart. "You've given me back something I didn't even know I'd lost. You've helped me reclaim my pride, my heritage, myself. As winter settled over Silver Ridge, bringing cold winds and occasional snow, Lucia's relationship with the town began to shift. Word had spread about her confrontation with the boys, and while some parents remained hostile, others started to soften. A few mothers began nodding to her on the street. The general store owner started asking her opinion on which primers to stock. Small changes, but meaningful. She and Caleb spent as much time together as propriety allowed, and probably a bit more than it should. He took her to his ranch on Sundays, showing her the land he loved, and introducing her to his small crew of cowhands. They were a rough group, but they treated her with respect, especially after Caleb made it clear that she was important to him. One Sunday in December, as they rode across his property, Caleb pulled his horse to a stop on a ridge overlooking a valley. The view was breathtaking, all rolling hills and distant mountains, the landscape harsh and beautiful in equal measure. "I want to show you something," he said, dismounting and helping her down from her horse. He led her to a flat area where the foundation of a house had been laid, the stones carefully placed and mortared. "I've been working on this for 2 years. It's going to be my home. A real home, not just a bunkhouse." Lucia walked around the foundation, imagining the walls and roof that would someday stand here. "It's going to be beautiful. I hope so. I want it to be a place where people feel welcome, where heritage and history are celebrated, not hidden." Caleb came to stand beside her, taking her hand. "I want it to be a place where my children will grow up proud of who they are and where they come from." He turned to face her, and Lucia's heart began to race as she saw the intention in his eyes. "Lucia Martinez, you have changed my life in ways I never expected. You've shown me what real courage looks like. And I want to spend the rest of my days making sure you never feel ashamed of who you are ever again. Will you marry me? Will you build this life with me?" Tears streamed down Lucia's face, but for once they were tears of joy. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. Caleb pulled a simple gold band from his pocket, and Lucia saw that it was engraved with tiny flowers, delicate and beautiful. "It's Mexican marigolds," he said softly. "I had it made special. I wanted you to have something that honored your heritage." The thoughtfulness of the gesture overwhelmed her, and Lucia threw her arms around his neck, kissing him with all the love and gratitude in her heart. "You're the most remarkable man I've ever known." "I'm just a cowboy who got lucky enough to fall in love with an extraordinary woman." Caleb slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. "Let's go tell the world." Their engagement caused quite a stir in Silver Ridge. Some people were genuinely happy for them, while others made their disapproval clear. Lucia found she cared less and less about the latter group. She had Caleb's love, she had her teaching position, and she had finally found the courage to be herself without apology. They were married in March of 1883, in a small ceremony at the Catholic Church 2 towns over. Lucia wore her grandmother's lace mantilla, a delicate creation that had been brought from Spain generations ago, and she walked down the aisle with her head held high. Caleb's sister served as witness, along with several of his ranch hands, and the priest spoke the vows in both English and Spanish at Lucia's request. When Caleb lifted her veil and kissed her, Lucia felt complete in a way she never had before. This was who she was meant to be: proud, loved, and unashamed. They moved into the completed house that spring, and Lucia spent happy hours decorating it with pieces that reflected both their heritages. Irish lace curtains hung beside Mexican pottery. Her grandmother's cross had a place of honor on the mantel next to Caleb's father's pocket watch. It was a home that celebrated everything they were, and Lucia loved every inch of it. She continued teaching, even as her belly began to swell with their first child. The children in her classroom had grown to respect her, and she had implemented new lessons about the diverse histories that made up the American West. Some parents complained to the school board, but others praised her innovative approach, and in the end, her position was secure. Their son was born in January of 1884, a healthy, squalling baby with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. They named him Daniel Gabriel Stone, the middle name chosen to honor Lucia's father. Caleb held the baby with such tenderness that Lucia fell in love with him all over again. "He's perfect," Caleb whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand. "Absolutely perfect." "He is," Lucia agreed, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "And he'll grow up knowing exactly who he is and where he comes from. We'll make sure of it." True to their word, they raised Daniel with stories from both sides of his heritage. Lucia taught him Spanish alongside English, and Caleb taught him the ranching skills passed down from Mexican vaqueros. They celebrated Irish holidays and Mexican traditions with equal enthusiasm, creating a family culture that was uniquely their own. As the years passed, Silver Ridge slowly changed. More diverse families moved to the area, and the rigid prejudices of the early days began to crack, if not completely crumble. Lucia became known as one of the finest teachers in the territory, and former students often returned to thank her for opening their minds to new perspectives. Caleb's ranch prospered, and he became known for his fair treatment of workers and his willingness to hire men regardless of their background. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Eleanor Rose in 1886 and another son, Patrick Miguel, in 1889. The house on the ridge rang with laughter and life, filled with the sounds of children speaking 2 languages and learning about a world bigger than the small prejudices of small minds. One evening in the summer of 1895, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Caleb took Lucia's hand. She was 40 years old now, with silver threading through her dark hair, and he thought she had never been more beautiful. "Do you remember the day we met?" he asked. "When you looked so ready to face down the world alone?" Lucia smiled, the memory as clear as if it were yesterday. "I remember. I was terrified and trying so hard to hide it." "You don't hide anymore." Caleb brought her hand to his lips. "You shine, Lucia. You always have, but now you let the world see it." "That's because you taught me I was allowed to." Lucia leaned her head on his shoulder, watching Daniel help his younger siblings build a fort from fallen branches. "You gave me back my pride, my heritage, myself. You made sure I never felt ashamed again." "We gave that to each other," Caleb corrected gently. "You taught me that love means accepting all of someone, not just the easy parts. You showed me what it means to be brave every single day." They sat in comfortable silence, the evening air warm and sweet with the scent of sagebrush. Eleanor ran up to the porch, her face flushed with excitement, chattering in rapid Spanish about the bird's nest she had found. Lucia answered in the same language, her voice full of warmth and encouragement, and watched as her daughter ran back to share the discovery with her brothers. "She's so confident," Lucia marveled. "None of our children will ever know what it's like to hide who they are." "No, they won't. Because of you." Caleb wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "Because you were brave enough to reclaim your heritage and pass it on. That's a legacy worth more than all the gold in California." Lucia thought about the journey that had brought her here. From the frightened young woman stepping off the stagecoach to the confident mother and teacher she had become. It hadn't been easy. There had been setbacks and struggles, moments when she had wanted to retreat behind the old walls. But Caleb had been there every step of the way, not fighting her battles for her, but standing beside her as she fought them herself. He had believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself, and that faith had given her the strength to become the woman she was always meant to be. "I love you," she said softly, "more than words can express." "I love you too, mi corazón." Caleb's Spanish was still imperfect after all these years, but the endearment never failed to make Lucia smile. Today, tomorrow, and always. As the sun set over the Nevada hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Lucia closed her eyes and breathed in the moment. This was happiness, she thought. This was peace. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of love and acceptance and pride. She had found her place in the world not by making herself smaller, but by claiming her full space with confidence and grace. The children's laughter rang out in the gathering dusk, a sound of pure joy that echoed across the valley. Lucia opened her eyes and smiled, knowing that Whatever challenges the future might bring, she would face them with her head held high and her heritage worn proudly. She was no longer ashamed, she was no longer hiding. She was simply and completely herself, and that was more than enough. Years continued to flow like the seasons, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Daniel grew into a strong young man who spoke Spanish as fluently as English and worked the ranch with pride in both his Irish and Mexican heritage. Elena became a teacher like her mother, carrying forward the legacy of cultural celebration to a new generation. Patrick showed a talent for horses that reminded everyone of the great vaqueros of old, and he trained animals with a gentle hand and patient heart. Lucia continued teaching until she was 55, when her aching joints finally convinced her to retire. Her last day at the schoolhouse was attended by 3 generations of former students, all of whom credited her with opening their minds and changing their lives. There were tears and laughter and enough flowers to fill the entire building. Caleb, silver-haired but still strong, pulled her close as they walked home together. "You've made such a difference in this town, in this world." "We've made a difference together," Lucia corrected, echoing his words from years ago. "Everything we built side by side." They grew old together on their ranch, surrounded by children and eventually grandchildren, all of whom were taught to be proud of their complex heritage. The house on the ridge became known as a place of welcome, where people of all backgrounds were treated with respect and dignity. Lucia's kitchen was famous for its blend of Irish soda bread and Mexican tamales, often served at the same meal to delighted guests. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Caleb gave Lucia a gift that made her weep, a family tree he had painstakingly researched and illustrated, tracing both their lineages back generations. It hung in their parlor, a visual representation of the rich tapestry of their joined lives. "Look at all we come from," he said, standing beside her as they examined the intricate branches, "and look at all we've created." Lucia traced the names with her finger, from Irish farmers to Spanish grandees, from Mexican ranchers to American pioneers. Every person represented there had contributed something to the people they had become, and everyone deserved to be remembered with honor. "Thank you," she whispered, "for all of it. For seeing me, for loving me, for helping me find my way back to myself. It's been the greatest privilege of my life." Caleb kissed her temple, and Lucia leaned into him, marveling that after all these years his touch could still make her heart race. They lived long lives, well into their 70s, rare for the time and testament to the loving home they had built. When Caleb finally passed in his sleep on a quiet autumn night in 1911, Lucia held his hand and whispered her love in both languages, grateful for every moment they had shared. He had changed her life in ways both large and small, but the greatest gift had been his unwavering belief in her worth. Lucia lived another 3 years, spending her final days surrounded by family, telling stories in Spanish and English about the old days, about courage and love and pride. When she joined Caleb at last, her children buried her with her grandmother's cross and the ring engraved with marigolds, symbols of a heritage reclaimed and a love that had transformed everything. Their legacy lived on in their descendants, in the school where Lucia had taught, in the ranch that still operated under the Stone name. But most of all, it lived on in the lesson they had taught by example, that love means accepting and celebrating all of who someone is, that heritage is something to be proud of, not ashamed of, and that sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply being yourself without apology. The house on the ridge stood for generations, a testament to 2 people who had found each other in an unlikely place and built something beautiful together. And in the hearts of all who knew their story, Lucia and Caleb remained forever young, forever in love, forever proud of who they were and what they had created. It was a story of reclamation and pride, of a cowboy who saw a woman's true worth and made sure she never felt ashamed again, and of a love that had changed not just 2 lives, but countless others for generations to come.